I sat at the kitchen table stirring my coffee absent-mindedly. The morning sunlight poured through the window, casting long shadows across the room. Tomorrow was my birthday. My 36th birthday. Normally, Henry would make a big deal about it, teasing me about getting older or giving me that sly grin he did whenever he was planning something. But this year, everything felt different. I glanced at my phone. A message from Rose. "Sorry, I'll be late today. Big day ahead. I'll call later. XX." I smiled faintly. Rose always had a way of texting like that, informal but full of excitement. We'd been best friends since childhood, and there was a comfort in her words, even now when I felt something was off. The truth was, I'd been noticing things recently. Small things like the way she smiled too widely or the way she avoided my eyes when I asked her about Henry. The nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach wouldn't go away. Henry had been quieter than usual. More distant. 4 weeks now, I'd seen him slipping out for meetings, or staying on his phone for longer than normal. And the way he spoke about work, like it was always urgent, always something that couldn't wait, felt like an excuse. But I was trying not to read too much into it. After all, it was just a few days before my birthday and maybe he was planning something. Right? So I couldn't shake the feeling. I sat there for a while, letting the silence of the house settle in around me. It felt heavy. I didn't like it. The suspicion grows. By the time Henry came home that evening, the house felt even more suffocating. He walked in smiling, but there was something off about it. Too wide. Too forced. He dropped his briefcase by the door and immediately checked his phone. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "How was your day?" Henry barely looked up, swiping through his phone with one hand. "Yeah, good. Busy. You know how it is." I nodded, trying to pretend like it didn't bother me. I did know how it was. Business, meetings, clients, endless deadlines. It was always the same story with Henry. But it wasn't just the work anymore. It was how he was acting around me. How he seemed to forget about me even when we were in the same room. "Rose says she's coming over tomorrow," I said, forcing my tone to sound casual. "For my birthday, you know?" Henry froze for just a moment and I caught it. I saw the brief flicker of something in his eyes, something he quickly covered up with a casual shrug. "That's nice. You'll have fun." "I'm sure." I wasn't convinced. He didn't sound like he cared. I'd been married to Henry long enough to know when he was pretending. I didn't know what was going on, but I could tell it wasn't good. He went on, "I have that meeting tomorrow morning, so I might be late, but I'll try to be back early. Don't worry." I looked at him, studying his face, trying to catch any sign of guilt. But there was nothing. Only that same fake smile. I didn't reply. He wasn't even thinking about my birthday. The restaurant incident. The next day was a blur of disappointment. I tried to shake the feeling that something was wrong. But the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I became. When Henry called later in the day to say he'd be late, I didn't know whether to be angry or just accept it. Another last-minute business deal, another promise to be home soon, which meant nothing. I decided to go for a walk to clear my head. I needed to get away from the house. That's when I saw them. Henry and Rose walking into the restaurant where Henry and I had met all those years ago. It was strange enough to see them together, but the way they slipped into the back entrance, not even noticing me, made something in my chest twist. My heart pounded as I froze in my tracks. I didn't know why, but something felt wrong about it. I told myself I was being paranoid. They were probably just grabbing dinner together or something else completely innocent. But the nagging feeling wouldn't leave. Why the back entrance? Why hadn't they seen me? I turned away, my head spinning. No, it couldn't be. But the truth kept creeping in. Henry and Rose? No way. Not them. The night before my birthday. That evening, Henry tiptoed into the house around midnight, apologizing for being late. He explained, in his usual vague way, that a client had insisted on going over things for hours and he couldn't leave. "Important meeting," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. I lost track of time. I nodded, not saying a word. I wasn't angry, not yet. It just felt numb. It was hard to confront him when I didn't even know what was happening. "Don't worry about it," I said flatly. "I'm sure it was important." I tried to keep the disappointment out of my voice, but it was hard. Everything felt so off. He kissed my forehead and crawled into bed, but I stayed up for a while, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow was my birthday. I should be excited. But instead I felt like the walls were closing in. I wanted to confront him. I wanted to demand answers. But I didn't. Not yet. I still held on to a tiny shred of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was all nothing. Maybe it was all in my head. The morning after. The sound of Henry's car leaving the driveway woke me up. I glanced at the clock. 6 a.m. I threw on a robe and ran to the door just in time to see him driving off. He didn't even glance back. He didn't even remember it was my birthday. I stood there in the doorway staring at the empty driveway. It was the first time in 6 years he'd forgotten. The first time he hadn't even bothered to say, "Happy birthday," before leaving. I couldn't even breathe for a moment, the emptiness of the house pressing down on me. At the office. I got to work, my mind still reeling. As if things weren't bad enough, when I arrived at my office, I found a small basket sitting on my desk. A gift from Patrick, Rose's boss. "Happy birthday, Magda. I hope you have a wonderful day. Enjoy the treats." Inside was chocolate, a bottle of wine, and a greeting card. It should have been a sweet gesture, but all I could think about was how Henry had forgotten. How Rose had forgotten. And then I realized something that made my stomach drop. Everyone except Patrick had forgotten. The entire day went by without so much as a message. I called Henry. No answer. I called Rose. No answer. Lunch with Patrick. By 4 p.m. I couldn't take it anymore. I called Patrick and we agreed to meet for lunch. It wasn't that I was really hungry. I just needed to talk to someone who didn't feel like a ghost in my life. We went to a local bar and I drank a little more wine than I should have. I wasn't thinking straight. The alcohol helped, though, at least for a little while. "Are you sure you're okay?" Patrick asked when he dropped me off at home. "Yeah, I'm fine," I said, my voice slurring slightly. I didn't care anymore. It's just a birthday. Nothing major. He helped me to the front door, but when I stepped inside, the house was dark. I knew Henry wasn't home yet. "He's still not back," I muttered, disappointment settling into my bones. Patrick looked at me, his expression softening, but I didn't want to hear anything else. I dragged him inside, not really thinking about what I was doing. I wasn't myself anymore. I pushed him toward the couch, stumbling as I tried to distract myself. And just then the lights flicked on. Surprise. Surprise. The room exploded with laughter and cheers. I blinked, trying to focus. There were people everywhere. Friends, family. 12 of them. Henry stepped forward, grinning sheepishly. "Happy birthday, Magda." I didn't know how to feel. The party was a surprise, sure, but something still felt off. Rose stood in the corner, smiling. But it wasn't the same smile. I was confused. I felt guilty and embarrassed. Why had I assumed the worst? Henry, sensing my hesitation, stepped closer. "I'm sorry if I seemed distant lately. I didn't want you to suspect anything. I wanted today to be a surprise." It hit me all at once. Everything had been part of a plan. The meetings, the secretive phone calls, even Rose's odd behavior. It was all about this moment. Rose gave me a guilty look. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you, Magda. But it was all Henry's idea. He wanted to surprise you with a party. We've been working on it for weeks." I felt my cheeks flush, the shame rushing in. I jumped to conclusions, misread every signal, and it had nearly ruined everything. Rose, Henry, "I'm sorry," I whispered, suddenly overwhelmed. They smiled at me, relieved, and Henry took my hand. "We just wanted to make sure you had a special day. It's been hard keeping it from you." I was filled with both gratitude and regret. How many times have I jumped to conclusions? How often had I let my suspicions cloud my judgment? The lesson. Later, as I sat in the middle of the celebration laughing with friends, the lesson hit me hard. I had let my fears and insecurities take over, jumping to conclusions based on the smallest things, based on nothing more than a hunch. I had been wrong. I knew now that assumptions without evidence could tear relationships apart. Sometimes the truth was far simpler than we imagined. And I'd learned that lesson the hard way.